I've met a handful of very sincere MPs who will say exactly what they think, both on and off camera. I keep referencing Miriam Cates, for example. But I have also encountered lots of people who work in the space who are the exact kind of self-serving dark triad types that
they are full of tripe, though.
Quite. That are drawn to the halls of power because fame, accolades, a general ability to have superiority over other people, and one factor that cannot be underplayed here, that lots of people are uncomfortable talking about, though it does come up in the headlines a lot, is lots of them trade sexual favors. They have absolutely no mores about doing that. This is why, again, another taboo, there's a large overrepresentation of gay men in politics, because often they do sleep around. This is why the Tory party has run into, in the last decade or so in government, instances like the Chris Pincher affair, or Crispin Blunt being kicked out for groping allegations, or Andrew Rosendale, who just had his allegations rescinded, but was under investigation for rape for a very long time, or I believe it's Neil Parish, who was the MP that was looking at pornography in the Commons, or Peter Bone, who decided to expose himself to male staffers and cheat on his wife, and then his wife was running as the candidate in the Wellingborough by-election. These stories just go on and on and on at a level that is seen much higher than the general population. So,
yeah, and I used to think that part of it might have been the fact that there's more scrutiny on an elected official, and that this might have been representative of the world as a whole, but, you know, we don't hear about it when it's, I don't know, greengrocers. I don't know why that came to mind.
Well, these people have the most ability to wield power on behalf of someone else's influence, and so if you can compromise those people with blackmail material, then it makes it an ideal mechanism with which to capture politicians. So I think actually you have two classes here. You have the dark triad types who are very intelligent, who can pull the strings of their useful idiots below them, and whether or not those useful idiots are just power-seeking and a bit dim, so they'll mouth whatever platitudes are fed to them, or are sordid personalities who can be easily compromised in sexual scenarios and therefore be made to vote along a party line or on behalf of a lobbyist, that's not really a distinction. It's an interesting distinction to make, but it's in practice, the distinction isn't even there, because they will just serve whoever has gotten them into the compromised situation or has fed them the easiest line to repeat to the media when they're trotted out on their rounds as the cabinet minister for all the news shows that morning.
No, absolutely. And of course, I'm making a generalization about some politicians, perhaps not all. You know, there are politicians that are clear sort of examples of being atypical of this rule I'm describing, but it's worthwhile to consider that this is a sort of typology of the politician, if you will, to use the language of the 19th century.
Nayib Bukele doesn't fall into this category, but someone like Andrew Cuomo most definitely does.
Yeah, but it's not sexual assault because he's Italian. To be fair, that did make me laugh when I read it, even though it was kind of like, well, you're not even saying, you know, no, you're just like, I'm Italian.
Forget about it.
Like water off a duck's back, isn't it? But yes, interest in politics more generally, both in terms of discussing politics, voting, running for political office. All of these metrics seem to align with dark triad traits, which is slightly worrying as someone who works in the political commentary sphere.
I've met a lot of non-politicians that also fit that category. Media is almost exactly the same. I mean, can't name names for legal reasons, but there are people who have committed actual crimes who have gone on television talking about politics. So, yeah.
I'm not surprised. But yeah, I think that you can also, there's an element of, you know, sort of being like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, that it's a massive burden to bear, but you recognise if you don't do it, then, you know, the fate of things might fall in the balance. And that's, I think, quite a noble impulse. And, you know, I'm not patting myself on the back there. But
we don't trust anyone else to do this job because everyone else is pretty much incompetent. Like, if a TV spot doesn't go to me, there's a very few number of people that I could name that would do well in my stead. Otherwise, the narrative keeps being reinforced. So yes, I would quite like to go back to being a builder and digging gardens for a living and coming home to a nice home-cooked meal. but I don't trust anyone else not to screw the country up. Same with Miriam. The only reason she stopped being a high school for Americans, biology teacher and a mum was that she just went, right, you keep screwing up my kid's life. So as long as I can be an MP until the party screw it up and make me lose my seat, I'll do the most I can in office before being turfed out.
No, it's very true. I mean, if I weren't doing something like this, I'd either be in academia as a psychologist or what my sort of heart tells me I want to do, and digging. I nearly said trenches, but on like a farm. Right.
Well, if Tobias Ellwood's had his way, I mean, we'll both be doing that in Ukraine sometimes.
Oh, blimey, God forbid. But on the topic of Tobias Ellwood, let's talk about the Dark Triad, shall we? So the Dark Triad are 3 different traits that are associated with psychopathy. And I'm going to be using these to sort of analyze the different factors of manipulation. But in most cases, I think that a combination of all 3 and a particular focus on one of them tends to be the case for each manipulative tactic. It's not necessarily a neat category where you can say, this is, narcissistic, this is Machiavellian, this is psychopathic. And I'm going to read the definitions from a website called IDR Labs, which is actually where you can go and take one of those tests. I did take one, and I'll read out my results, but I'm not going to show them on screen to you, Connor, because you've seen them before. So the first one is narcissism, which it reads, is an egotistical interest in or admiration of oneself. I mean, who'd have thought? Narcissists tend to be excessively preoccupied with themselves and motivated by getting admiration from others and maintaining a grandiose self-image. Because narcissists are so preoccupied with getting others to buy into their self-image, they may initially seem charming, but most narcissists have trouble developing real friendships on account of their difficulty with empathy and their lack of interest in others. And spoiler alert, this is the trait I actually scored the lowest on by far.
That doesn't surprise me because you are very considerate. I mean, I have met people that I would classify as sincere narcissists. And the way I can describe it is that all of their personal relationships only exist insofar as they're conditional on ceding to them personal advancements. Mm-hmm. So whether or not that's validation, which they can obviously crowdsource through social media, or in the political arena, if that's that they are influential and they can provide them a job opportunity or media airtime or funding for their campaign, they will shake hands and slap backs and be very forthcoming with their enthusiasm so long as you're advantaging them. But the moment that you are seen as some kind of detraction from their energy or their self-image, or someone comes along with a better opportunity, there's zero loyalty there. And that's very common.
That's the way I kind of characterize it in my own mind, and the psychological literature as well, is that the world is a tool for self-servingness. I don't know if that's a proper word, but they use the world to serve their own interests is a much better way of putting it, I think.
It's very solipsistic. You almost act as if not only you are the only person that exists, but therefore you are the only person that it is important that all things serve the interests of.
Absolutely. And you're right to frame it in the way you did, I think. And I used to refer to these people when I was at university as people who are pathologically normal. Like, most people just presumed they were sort of normal people because, when you have the interactions in a sort of university environment, you're not really having really long form conversations. You kind of run into people, they might be in your class. They might seem relatively well adjusted, at least they're not smelly and weird. And so people liked them. But I think because I had a particular eye for it, I could kind of figure out, hang on a minute, this person, there's something off about them.
It's unnerving how interested they are in you and how happy they are just to make small talk.
Yeah. There's a certain element of insincerity about things.
I've dated girls like that, yeah.
It's just quite strange, I think, and you can tell that something off. Trust your instincts. I'm going to turn to Obi-Wan here. In the original Star Wars films, that you can read vibes pretty well, most people, and that your vibes will tell you if there's something off with someone. And I think that with narcissism, that's the way you do it, in a sense. Of course, some people are not very subtle with it either, and they're just openly self-aggrandizing. And sometimes that can be funny. Like, sometimes I like to do it for humor's sake, when it's, the purpose is that I'm making a joke at my own expense rather than anything else.
There is a TV presenter who genuinely not have a conversation with you unless the entire topic is about him.
I know who you mean. Not going to say that.
Moving on.
I value not being sued. The next one is Machiavellianism, and this one kind of does Machiavelli dirty, because I think Machiavelli as a thinker was not nearly as sort of dark and psychopathic. He was just kind of a political realist, I suppose.
He was also very patriotic.
Yeah, and so I feel like the psychological term is a little bit insulting to Machiavelli, but at the same time, it is capturing a very real phenomenon, and I think it's just unfortunate that his name got attached. But it's characterized by a duplicitous interpersonal style, a cynical disregard for morality, and a focus on self-interest and personal gain. People who score high on Machiavellianism tend to be unemotional and take an instrumental view of others. They are therefore able to detach themselves from conventional morality and manipulate others. Highly Machiavellian individuals can be very patient with their deceptions due to their calculating nature. And yes, this is one of the ones where I think it's quite insidious now. You know, narcissism is quite often a product of insecurity. You know, someone wants to feel liked, perhaps because they didn't have the best relationship with their parents. That's my sort of armchair psychologizing. Good thing I'm a psychologist. But with Machiavellianism, it speaks of a proper darkness to my mind. You know, the narcissism aspect often co-occurs because that sort of paves the way for the willingness to do Machiavellian things to other people.
It's a prerequisite entitlement, and then Machiavellianism is the instrument of you getting what you want. A perfect example of this is that Ofcom is kind of the enabling condition for token leftists to get a disproportionate amount of airtime on dissident stations, or formerly dissident stations like GB News and Talk TV. So if you are a right-wing commentator, and I mean right-wing as in reactionary traditionalist, properly socially conservative, you will be gate-kept out. No. You're left-wing. You'll be gate-kept out. You're welcome. You could be gate-kept out by a lot of fresh out of university producers who are doing underhanded tactics. So I have been blacklisted from a network before. It got lifted, but it was by a rogue producer. So if you make it past that, and you have some good people on the inside who quite like what you say, or a regular host which books you, fantastic. You're then competing, unless you have a strong relationship with that person and get a regular slot, with a large cohort of other people that Ofcom could brand right-wing and therefore biased. Whereas there are a slim cohort of left-wingers who are not true believers, but rather cynics, who will use the station and the smaller pool of competition to get regular gigs as the Ofcom mandated stooge for the other side. And they don't even need to be particularly articulate or intelligent or well-informed. They can say complete nonsense and never be held to account on it. But by the virtue of needing to fill that slot, they will be drafted in and get paid the exact same, or even charge higher appearance fees, because their time and presence is so scarce. And so those people are very savvy political actors who are using discourse for purely personal gain.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.